Esiet sveicināti visi darbnīcā reāla laika vizualizācija programmēšana ar Hydra. Šis norisinās ciklī ietveros Update Hybrid Labs, un šo ciklu atbalsta Eiropas komisijas programma Radošā Eiropa. Mēs raidam no Liepajas Universitātes mākslas pētījuma laboratorijas. Un turpmāk pasākumu turpināsim angļu valodā. My name is Krista Dintere. I'm a lecturer here in Liepaja University and your host for today. We welcome you to the workshop Live Coding Visuals with Hydra by Olivia Jack. This workshop is a part of Update Hybrid Labs event series. Update Hybrid Labs is a free lecture, discussion, and workshop cycle, which is held to empower artists and other interested people with digital skills for creative content creation. It's organized by Liepaja University Art Research Lab and supported by EU program Creative Europe. Today we'll start with presentation and Hydra live coding demo by Olivia Jack, which will be followed by a discussion. So feel free to write your comments and questions to Olivia here on chat and as well on YouTube comments section. So this workshop will continue tomorrow, so on Thursday and Friday in late afternoons from 4 to 7 p.m. And yes, so I'm very glad to introduce our guest and workshop leader, Olivia Jack. Olivia Jack is a programmer and artist and performer who works with open source software, live coding, and as well experimental interfaces. Her research interests include algorithmic representations of uncertainty and chaos, peer-to-peer networking, and live coding. She is the developer of Hydra, which is a browser-based platform for live coding visuals, and it is inspired by analog video synthesis, which I'm sure she will tell us more about. Hydra is an ongoing research project, and it's a software platform that many people have taken as well on. And yeah, so it turns your browser window into a kind of a node of a modular video synthesizer. And the project explores the possibilities for collaboration and performance on the web, which is very essential in these times. I welcome you, Olivia, and I invite you to tell us more about your creative practice, your inspirations, as well as introduce us to the possibilities of live coding with Hydra. So I welcome you, Olivia.
Thank you, Krista, and thank you all for having me. This is very exciting. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Let's see. And Krista already did a great job introducing Hydra, but here's a screenshot of it. Hydra runs in the browser, and you can directly kind of see the whole editor by going to hydra.ojac.xyz. And as Krista mentioned, it's inspired by analog video synthesis. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what Hydra is and the inspirations for it, and also some connections to other projects that I've developed. And then also do a little bit of a coding demo within Hydra. And so I first started, I'm going to backtrack a little bit, and I first started making Hydra when I got interested in analog video synthesis, which is what you can see now is an analog video synthesizer called the Sandine image processor, created by Dan Sandine in 1977. And so this is similar also to analog sound synthesizers, but basically what you have here is you have these sort of boxes of electronic components, and each box either creates a signal or modifies a signal. And when the signal, which is a change in voltages over time, gets to the TV screen, it generates a pattern across the screen. And it's similar to analog sound synthesis, but instead of having a screen at the end, you have a speaker. And so the speaker responds to the changes in voltages over time, which becomes vibrations of sound in time. And I got really interested in just reading about these and reading about analog synthesizers, and wanted to try it out, but I didn't have, all this kind of expensive hardware. I didn't have tools or know how to make one myself, but I thought, okay, I'll read about it and sort of write code to simulate this analog hardware. And another source of inspiration for Hydra outside of analog synthesis, that's kind of a key part to it, is the WebRTC API. And this is actually just a technical documentation of a browser API. An API is just sort of a browser library that you can use within code that runs in the browser. And so what WebRTC stands for is Web Real-Time Communication. And it's sort of a protocol that lets browser windows send real-time streams of video and audio and data between each other. And so basically, if you have multiple browser windows open, you can be sending a video stream or an audio stream or a data stream between those windows. And so, and this is sort of a diagram of the kind of communication that WebRTC enables. And one thing exciting about this is that you don't necessarily need a server in order to send this type of information. Basically, each browser window can act as either receive video or audio, or it can share video or audio. And I'm going to explain a little more what this is in a sec. So I know it's a bit technical, possibly, but I got interested in this idea of sharing video streams between browsers. And so this is just a video of a demo I did before Hydra existed. But here what you can see is actually each window is sharing a video stream with the other windows. So these first two windows send a video stream to the third window, and in that window, the two video streams get blended together, and then that gets sent to the last window. And so basically, each window is sharing video streams between each other. And to me, I was interested in this as a way to experiment with this kind of new web technology, the WebRTC, but use ideas about video synthesis and analog video synthesis as a way to think about sending video around the internet. And so I was just interested in WebRTC and streaming on the web, and I wasn't really sure exactly why I was interested, or I didn't have a specific plan of what to do with it. And so as I was kind of starting to experiment with this, oops, let me see if I can play this again. As I started to experiment with this protocol of WebRTC and this idea of sending video streams on the browser, I started actually live coding in the browser console. You can see in this video, I have the browser console of each window open. And as part of this experimentation process, I started writing code just within the browser console to change what was happening and to start to experiment with this idea of sharing videos with WebRTC. And so this was before I made Hydra, which I will go into a little bit in a second, but I wanted to sort of show the inspiration for it and a bit of how I started live coding is that I didn't set out to make a live coding tool. It just was the most direct way to experiment with this kind of thing that I wanted to experiment, which is browser, WebRTC and sharing video streams in the browser. So I'll go back to Hydra now, and this is my browser window that's open. And the idea of analog synthesis fits into Hydra at several different levels. There's this idea that you can share video streams between anyone else who's connected to Hydra, but also the syntax and language itself is really inspired by analog video synthesis. And I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction to that and then step back again and show some kind of broader things that I and other people have done with Hydra. But when you open the browser window, you see this visuals happening in the back, and there's this window in the front. And if you close this window, then some text appears on the screen, and there's still this colorful visual happening in the background. And the text on the screen is generating what you see in the background. And so one thing with Hydra is when you open it, you immediately see a sketch that someone else has made, and you can immediately sort of start to change numbers in the sketch. Then if you press Option Enter or Alt Enter, then it runs the code. And so here, for example, if I change a number next to color, it has an effect. Or if I change a number here, I start to already create different visuals. And when I introduce people to this, I really like to encourage people to actually just sort of play around and try changing numbers. Similar to if you had a bunch of knobs in front of you, and just one way to approach kind of learning to code something like this isn't necessarily to learn everything by heart or to study it all, but it's just to try something and see what happens. And so often when I first introduce people to Hydra, I like to say, just play around and see what happens. But I'm going to go ahead and clear what's on the screen right now. And now I will explain a little bit of how aspects of it work and what I mean when I say modular video synthesis. So one of the base sort of units of the synthesizer is something called an oscillator. And so if you're familiar with some electronic sound synthesis, you might have used an oscillator. And so in Hydra, in order to create an oscillator, you type OSC .out. And so if I just type OSC and I run the code by pressing Alt Enter, nothing actually happens. And that's because it's like I've sort of created a signal, but I haven't connected it to the screen yet. And so if I type .out, that's like connecting the signal that I've created to the screen. And so if I run the code again, I get this oscillating or repeating pattern in the background. I'm just going to go back really quickly to this image of the modular synthesizer. So when I type OSC with the parentheses after it here, you can think of it as sort of one of these boxes that's generating a signal. And if I change the numbers that are in parentheses, it's similar to turning a knob of a synthesizer. And so I can change the numbers here. And the oscillator has 3 parameters. One that's frequency, one is how fast it's moving, and the last, which is how separated the colors are. And so here I've created an oscillator and I've connected it to the output by doing this dot out. And then what I can do is I can start to transform that signal. So I could do something like add a rotate to it. I could add a kaleidoscope. I could repeat it. And so each of these words that come off after oscillator are functions. And so the function transforms the signal that comes before it. And you could think of the function as very similar to, in this modular synthesizer, each module. And one of the things that Dan Sandin, the creator of this synthesizer in the 70s, talked a lot about was designing the modules in a way that you can combine them in as many ways as possible. And so that's something that I'm interested in Hydra as well, is that each function you can change the order and then it can have a different effect on what's happening. There's also a pixelate function. Let's see. And I think one thing that creating this sort of language and creating Hydra made me think a lot about is how in almost any software that we use, there's sort of ideas embedded about the world in it. Like, for example, using PowerPoint, there's this idea of a slide and then you show one image and then you show the other. And it's sort of derived from when there used to be slide projectors that were physical things with slide projectors. Or typing into a Word document, there's this idea of when I type on the keyboard, the text, it starts at one place and it fills out this sort of document on a screen. And we've created this analogy to help us understand when we're interacting with the computer, okay, the text is gonna show up in sort of a line and there's gonna be a paragraph, and it has all these kinds of ideas that fit with when typewriters used to exist. And same with kind of graphics programs like Photoshop or Illustrator, for example. Photoshop uses lots of ideas that come from photo editing. And so Hydra uses a lot of ideas that come from analog video synthesizers, and this idea of routing a signal through different functions and transforming that signal. And another thing that you can do in Hydra is, here we're starting with an oscillator, but I could, for example, use my camera instead. And so here I turned on the camera, but I haven't actually connected it into my patch. And so if I want to actually use the camera, I can type SRC. And so now I'm using my camera inside Hydra, and I could, for example, change the color of the camera. And so in this case, instead of starting with the oscillator, I'm starting with the camera. but I could still kind of apply the same transformations to it like this, or repeat it, and all of these things. And so in Hydra, in addition to the camera source and in addition to the kind of visual sources that are inside the environment, like an oscillator, you can also use any window as a source. So any other kind of visual thing that you have happening on your screen can be a source. And you could also use a video or an image, the webcam, or anyone else, a live stream of anyone else who's connected to Hydra. Whatever they're doing can become an input to what you're doing. And so another thing here, right now we're kind of seeing everything on this one screen, but another thing you could do is actually have multiple outputs and show one thing on one output and another thing at another output, and then also combine those things together. So something I could also, for example, do here is now create an oscillator. And obviously the next few days in the workshop, I'll go more into this, but I'm just sort of giving a little bit of a demo, because I could have one thing going on one screen, another thing going on the other screen. Then I could use, combine those two things. So now I'm taking the thing in the top left and I will combine it with the thing in the bottom left and send it out to the screen on the top right. And so part of one of my goals creating Hydra was to make a relatively straightforward way in code to combine lots of different sources and outputs together. So here's an example. I think once I started making this and put it online, again, Hydra, it started just as sort of my own explorations into this WebRTC API and what you could do with browser streaming on the web. And then I found it really interesting to play with, and I started sort of doing daily sketches just with Hydra. Not even intentionally, I just found myself interested in seeing what kinds of things I could do with it. And so here's an example using the camera. Here's another example of something I tried with Hydra, which was using, it's a live stream of Times Square and a live stream of a fish tank. And then in Hydra, I blend the two together. And a lot of my work is in the browser. And I think I'm interested in the browser for a lot of different reasons. But one of the obvious reasons is that it's very accessible, and anyone, it could work on a phone, it could work on a computer. And so instead of making a tool that you have to install and buy and do all these things with, I really like the immediacy and the liveness of the browser, of that you immediately can have all these things interconnected with each other and experiment with them. And another thing that I'm interested in with browser-based, working with the browser, is also kind of challenging this idea of the internet as a place, or a website as a place that you go to, and also thinking of just thinking of a website as a flow of information or a flow of things coming through it, and it might be different each time you go there. It might not be a place. And so I started to make Hydra, I put it online, people started to use it. And I realized that I learned a lot from seeing what other people were doing with it that was really different than the things I had imagined doing with it. And so one thing that I did is I created this Twitter bot, which is basically when you're in the editor, you can share a sketch. What that does is it automatically, oops, let me go to Hydra. What that does is it automatically shares the sketch that you did on this Twitter bot. And so here you can see kinds of all the different things that other people have been doing with Hydra. And one thing that you could do is if you click on this link, it automatically opens the editor with the sketch and the code that someone else generated. And so you can immediately change the code of what someone else did. And then what happens is if you upload the sketch again, when it shows up in the Twitter gallery, it shows your sketch, but then it also shows whose sketch what you did was based on. And this is interesting to me, again, because I feel like seeing what other people do with it, I really learn a lot. And it's one of the things that I think is amazing about open source software and having a community of people using something is that then everyone can share and sort of learn from each other. And another thing I was interested in creating this bot is this idea that everyone is sort of inspired by other people, and that being able to trace like, oh, this idea came from this other idea as sort of a collective sketchbook of ideas that people have made with this tool was really interesting to me. And I think with code, sometimes there's this idea that some people kind of just like are lone geniuses who know how to do everything and kind of woke up one day and wrote all this amazing code. And especially sometimes with generative art, I think everything that people do is built on things that other people have done. Pretty much any kind of software you can ever write is built on software that other people have written, unless you're building a computer completely from scratch. And so this was one way that was interesting to me of exploring this genealogy, that everything you do is sort of based on things that other people have done. And it's something that I've realized, again, as Hydra's gone from just some of my own experiments in the browser to then something that other people use to then kind of a community of people who use it, is that all of these technical decisions about how I set up the software and how I create the editor become sort of decisions about a community of people who use this and engage with each other as they use this. And also, as I started to, I think I started making Hydra 3 years ago now, or 3.5, almost 4 years ago, and putting sketches online. And then I started being invited to perform in live coding events. And I know Shelly was here last week, who's a big force in the live coding world. And live coding is sort of the practice of writing code in front of people to generate music and or visuals as a performance. And I've been a programmer for a long time, and I'm relatively new to live coding. And I came at it because I had these ideas that I wanted to explore, and the most direct way to explore them was, instead of writing a whole bunch of code that then is compiled and then you see the result later. Live coding allowed me to sort of try something out and immediately see the result of it. And so that's how Hydra came to be this live coding platform. And then that's also how I started to perform in different live coding events. And one kind of thing that happens often in live coding events is that people project their screen and they project the code of what they're doing in real time. And so if you're in the audience, you can kind of hear the music and you can, or see the visuals, and you can see the code that's creating those visuals. And to me, that's interesting, kind of in thinking of a computer or a laptop as an instrument. When you project the code, you can sort of see what the person is doing in real time. So similar to how, you know, if someone's playing the guitar, you can sort of see what they're doing. And I don't think all computer music has to be sharing the screen or something, but it's one way that I think within the live coding community, it's common to share what you're doing. And I think that's also part of the community aspect of it, of it's not so much about, oh, I'm doing this mysterious magic on my computer that's top secret that you can never know about, and you just have to kind of imagine. And like, here I'm sharing what I'm doing, and maybe that will inspire you, or maybe it's sort of opens the dialogue with what's happening during a performance. And personally, I like to use feedback a lot in what I do, and feedback is where the output of something becomes the input. Actually, I will show this. I'll show really quick here. A little bit of feedback in Hydra. So one thing I could do is I will use my webcam again. And so, oh, wrong webcam. Let's use this one. And let me see. Okay. So here I have a webcam. And when I turn the webcam back at the screen, you start to see this sort of infinite mirror thing happen. And basically what's happening is that the webcam is seeing what's on the screen, and what's in the webcam becomes the output of what's on the screen. And then what's on the screen becomes the input again to the webcam. And so when I'm doing this with Hydra, if I add some different transformations, in this case, like inverting it, then can immediately start to create these different sorts of effects. And it turns out that just this idea of video feedback is a way of modeling really complex mathematical systems, such as fluid dynamics and chaos theory, just because of sort of the instability of this system where the output becomes the input, becomes the output, makes it possible to create sort of really unpredictable things visually. And so I'll put the camera back here. But that's sort of one way of using feedback in Hydra, but another way is just actually directly within the code, setting the output to the input. And so in this case, I'm starting with the camera and I'm sending it out to this output called O0. But what I could do is actually blend that output back into the source, similar to what I was doing by turning the camera around. And so if I just do this you don't see so much of a difference. But there's a second parameter to blend, which is how much to blend. What I'm doing is I'm blending the source, which is the camera, which is with the output, which is the screen called O0. So if I blend this all the way to 1, then it ends up being a still image because the output's becoming the input, which is becoming the output again. And so nothing's changing. But if I put it a little less, I get this sort of ghost trail effect. And then one thing I can do is, and I'll go more into this in the workshops the next day, but there's this function called modulate in Hydra, which is sort of a way of warping things. And what it does is it uses the colors of one image to sort of warp the other image. And so what I can do here is use the camera to warp the image that's on the screen. And you end up getting this sort of liquid, sort of fluid thing happening in the background. And one thing I could do is, for example, increase the contrast a little bit, and then we get even more of this kind of fluid effects. And so just using this kind of really simple concept, which is the output of something becomes the input, and it changes a little bit each time. It's possible to model things like fluid dynamics or things that often seem mathematically really complicated, but maybe there's a way to intuitively sort of understand them and explore them without necessarily knowing the mathematical equations that run them. So back to kind of live coding is I enjoy experimenting with some of these ideas live, and especially using the editor itself and feedback with the code editor itself as kind of part of an improvised performance. And so this is this was a part of a performance that I did in New Jersey right before the pandemic started. Yeah, and again, I like to start out kind of just showing this direct relationship between the code and what's happening behind it. But this is, I'm going to show one more performance that I did I guess a year and a half ago, and this is actually in a planetarium in Bogota. And what you'll see is my browser window, but in a huge planetarium. And this is kind of really different than the last one that I showed. But to me, it was really exciting because I think sometimes it's easy to dismiss things in the browser as, oh, they're just sort of toys, or if you really want to do video and audio, you need to download the software. And so seeing this huge, being able to see what I was doing in this 4K by 4K screen, kind of immersive in a planetarium, was really exciting. So let's And that's my mouse cursor up there in the sky. And so another thing with Hydra is that it runs in the browser, and also what's nice is that I exported it as a library, so you can use it also as part of other web pages. So here's an example of that, and that's been interesting for me to experiment, especially since the pandemic started, I think, is creating different spaces for visuals or for performances in the web without necessarily using a YouTube video stream or something. And it's been exciting to see what people have been doing with Hydra embedded in websites. And this is a collaborative editor that I made that sometimes isn't working, but basically there's 3 channels of video, and it's kind of a different structure to the editor, but when you log in, you don't have to have any special user or anything. You can just edit what's on the screen. And to me, it was interesting because it can be anonymous. I mean, you can also give yourself a name, just to have this public visual space that people can do whatever they want to. And I noticed people started, what I like about this video is in the code, it's probably hard to see, but people start writing messages to each other in the comments. But it's sort of the only way is through writing code that you could kind of talk to someone else. And another thing that we've been doing more of lately is kind of having a meetup for Hydra. And here's an example of the second meetup that we had. And one of the things is we wanted a way for people to be able to share their work without having to use a certain proprietary platform or saying, oh, you have to join Facebook or something in order to share. And so basically what we did was just create anyone could add whatever they wanted to a collaborative spreadsheet, and then whoever signed up, it basically showed them on this list of the meetup website. And then if you click on someone, it shows kind of whatever it was that they wanted to share for the meetup, because when we first decided to have the meetup, about 80 people showed up, and it was too many to have everyone, you know, do a presentation of whatever they wanted to. So one thing with some other people involved in the Hydra community, we've been exploring how to create these spaces for sharing things, create these spaces for sharing things without too much extra work of creating a whole platform or something. And so the Meetup website is a place where you can see some of the things that some other people have done with Hydra, because I think now it's so much more than I can even keep track of. Kind of each day someone did something different with it. And so what I've liked about this is that it's possible to see a little bit of what other people are doing. Yeah, another thing that I'm really interested in is also sound. I often collaborate with musical artists, and in Hydra, you can make things react to music, but I tend to more like to, as a performer, react to the music and sort of interpret what I'm hearing into something visual. But another thing I've been really interested in is sort of using the visuals to control sound. So here's an example of something I did where I'm just using the pixel colors in Hydra. And in this case, it's just triggering samples when the pixel colors change. But I think I'm a really visual person. And so as I've been learning about sound, to me, I'm interested in this visual way of exploring it. So I'll show this really quick. So it's a little hard to see what's going on there, but basically just by live coding the visual and also live coding these pixel samples, then I could create different kinds of visual score for the sound that you could hear. And this is somewhat related to a project I did a long time ago called Pixel Synth, that basically lets you turn images into sound, and you can either draw or upload an image. I'll show it here. Let's see. It gets a bit screechy, but basically what it's doing is converting the different pixels into different frequencies. You can draw or upload an image. But this is something I did sort of a long time ago. And at the moment, I've been interested also in in combining this exploration with visual things that I'm doing with Hydra. And the last thing that I wanted to show is also kind of another direction that I've been experimenting with based out of Hydra. And let's see. And so what this is a hybrid editor that lets you either write code to do something or drag the things around on the screen. And I think as I code a lot, I realize there's some things that I like to do with code that give me sort of a high level control of things, but then there's other things that I really like to do with gestures, with either dragging or with even, I like to use MIDI controllers a lot, so like with turning knobs. And so this is sort of a hybrid editor that I've been working on, but may never finish, or maybe we'll finish sometime, but that lets you kind of write code or change text and have both things affect what's on the screen. And that's all that I have to talk about today. So thank you. And I guess we'll turn it over to questions now.
Yes, we have already some questions. So first of all, can you export visuals as a movie file directly from Hydra? Or how does this work? Or is it strictly live and on the web?
So there is a way to export movie files, but because of the web API, there's a lot of compression, so it doesn't look so good. So the easiest way is just actually to record your screen.
And yeah, so one more question. In your experience, how do people usually react to live coding audio-visual performances? If there's music, do you ever dance? And yeah, how does that work?
That's a good question. I think, you know, sometimes live coding performances are called algo raves, and that sort of implies, oh, it's a rave, there's people dancing. And in my experience, it really depends on the type of music, whether, and kind of your goals with it. You know, some people, their goal really is to play music that makes people dance, and other people have kind of a more experimental approach and are not as interested in that. Also, that's one thing about live coding, is that you can do any genre of music. And for example, I lived for a long time in Bogota, Colombia, and there some people play cumbia music, that's sort of a more traditional rhythm of music for dancing, but they use live coding to do it. And so I think it depends on the kind of environment and music that you want to create. Yeah.
Yeah. You said that you are actually relatively new to live coding. What was your previous background, and how did you come to visual arts and the field of live coding?
I've been a programmer for a long time. I've been a programmer for about 12 years. And I've always worked in kind of creative fields. I worked for a while in a science museum making interactive exhibits about science. And then I also have worked a lot doing live visuals for dance performances using code to create interactive visuals. And I've also, I think I've taught coding a lot, and I even taught coding in the art department of a university for a while. But I haven't studied art myself. But I guess all of these different things sort of fed into creating a live coding visual environment.
Okay. What kind of software did you use before, and how did you come to this idea that you should actually code your own software?
I think when I worked at the museum, I used a lot of Flash and then JavaScript, and then for dance performances, I used a lot of C++ and open frameworks. And it's interesting because it feels like, I think working with, for example, generative frameworks like processing or open frameworks, you can often feel like, oh, I'm just sketching something, or I'm just making something for myself. And that's something that was interesting for me is that I never decided, oh, I'm gonna make something for other people so much. I just was making things for myself, and I put them online, and then it turned into things that other people used. And so I think there's not as big of a divide as it might seem between just doing things for yourself and then making things for other people. That's something that's kind of beautiful about the browser, is that it's really immediate to share things.
Yeah. What do you think is community actually important to you? And do you feel that there's a certain community around live coding? And yeah, do you think that working with Hydra, does it blend as well into other communities? Like, yeah.
Yeah, community is really important to me. And I think one thing I mentioned before is how what started out as sort of a technical thing became a community of people as more people started using it and engaging with it. And the direction that Hydra goes really depends on kind of people's interests and the direction that they take it in. In terms of the live coding community in general, one thing that I really like is it's sort of pockets of people interested in different parts of the world. And for example, there's a really strong community in Latin America, but there's also communities in Japan and Indonesia and the UK. And I think it's exciting to me to see just pockets of people who are really interested in this in different places.
Yeah. What do you think on how much does the creative outcomes are dominated by the tools used? Do you feel that there's some certain visual aesthetics that are unique to Hydra, or how does these aesthetics relate to maybe something that it has inherited from, for instance, this video synthesis?
That's a really interesting question. I definitely think a certain aesthetics of Hydra has evolved in a sense where I can, sometimes I'll see an image and I'll often be pretty sure it was made with Hydra and not using something else, just because of this kind of often now this textural, noisy, glitchy thing is something that's relatively easier to do in Hydra compared to other things. But one thing I love is that also there's people who use it from really different backgrounds. For example, especially, I'm gonna sneeze. Oops, no, I was gonna sneeze, but then it didn't happen. But there's like a whole community of people in performing arts who use it, or graphic design. And so I found it's been relevant to people in really different kinds of fields. Or there's people who use a lot of hardware modular audio synthesizers who really like it because of that. And so each of those kind of niches has different aesthetics as well.
Talking about visual aesthetics, what are your inspirations in art, and where did you draw them from?
One thing, I used to paint a lot, and one thing I'm really inspired by is painting, and just the idea of sort of layering things onto a canvas. And it's something that I like with code as well, is to kind of layer things on top of each other. And a lot of more computer code aesthetics end up having these like very clean lines and geometric shapes. And I tend to like just much more messy, kind of messy, goopy aesthetics. and yeah, really, I relate to painting a lot.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, there's a question from audience. Is Hydra completely free to use and even for commercial projects?
Yeah, it is. It has a GPL2 license, which is the open source license, that if you modify it, your modifications have to be open source as well. But if you use it, you can use it in commercial projects. Right now, there's a place for people to donate, but I'm working on a more established way to donate so that people can support the project as well.
Okay, when talking about performance, there's an interesting question from the audience. Have you ever tried inserting the audience into the performance? And yeah, if yes, then how did you do it?
I actually just tried this this past weekend. I did a performance online for this festival based out of Belgium called Oscillation Festival. And instead of kind of doing a live stream, I made a website where everyone who was attending went to the website and could see me writing code live. And what I did is that everyone who was there appeared as a mouse cursor, but could also see each other's mouse cursors. And then I used that and the traces of the cursors as a part of the visuals. And so that was one way that I kind of included the audience. And I think there were a few technical difficulties. And so I think for some people it worked really well, and for other people, it didn't work so well. But I also, because I couldn't see the people in real life, I don't know how well it worked completely, but I got some good feedback that some people liked it.
Yeah, as well, I wanted to ask you how and if can you kind of implement some musical properties like rhythm, pitch, or like, I don't know, timbral textures into this live visuals? Is there a possibility to make audio reactive systems with Hydra?
Yeah, so there's a few ways. Within Hydra, there's a built-in kind of microphone audio input. So, and anything that's a number in Hydra can also be a variable. So you can use parameters of the audio to change, for example, the color or the frequency of the oscillator. Right now, the only built-in feature is getting the FFT of the audio, and so having parts of the visuals react to certain frequencies of sound. To do something like pitch, you could either write JavaScript code to do it, or you could share OSC messages with Hydra and have it respond in certain ways to OSC or MIDI messages.
Okay.
And we can try that in the tomorrow or the next day.
Okay, that sounds nice. Well, yeah, I somehow have generally a feeling about technologies today that everything is more or less about user interfaces, like in software, and all the kind of physical processes are like so complex that are hidden behind these layers and layers of user interface. So I somehow feel that at least for younger people who haven't like touched I don't know, a tape recorder, which is like a physical thing, they tend to have like less and less kind of knowledge about how stuff works. And what do you think, is Hydra somehow a window to kind of understand how visuals are made in computer, or is it more like an interface? Yeah, to create.
I hope it is a window in some way. And one thing interesting with Hydra is that it's all or mostly all code that runs directly on the graphics card. And so it all is basically just deciding what each pixel on the computer, what color each pixel on the computer should be. And a lot of ways of making graphics are much more abstracted than that. For example, you say like draw a circle at this coordinate or something, and then the computer is interpreting, if you said draw a circle over here, then that means that you want this pixel to be this color and this pixel to be this color. Whereas Hydra is a little bit more direct in that it's really just deciding what color each pixel should be. And I do agree that so much of technology and specifically web design is so focused on obfuscating what's really happening, of like making the user experience so smooth and so it doesn't matter what device you're on, it still works, and it works independently of all these things. And I think it's interesting to me to make something that doesn't necessarily work as well if you define working as working on every device, regardless of any kind of way you're using it. But it lets you kind of connect more to the device and the browser and all these things that are happening.
Yeah, I somehow feel as well that we kind of tend to humanize machines, and by researching before our talk, I heard you say in another interview that computers does not have a concept of a web page. It's like we imagine that it's like a thinking machine, but there are like these lower level processes behind. How has this kind of thing inspired you? And what do you think about media archaeology? Is it how important is it for creating Hydra?
I think it's very important. I mean, I don't have a formal kind of research practice, but I'm very inspired by, especially, for example, this synthesizer that Dan Sandine made in the 70s. That was much more inspiring to me than, for example, generative art on the internet today. And then another big inspiration for me is Kit Galloway and Sherry Rabinowitz, who experimented a lot with satellite technology in the early 80s and virtual space and live video streams. And to me, some of the stuff that they were doing is much more interesting to me for whatever reason than a lot of computer stuff that's happening now. One more that's really inspiring to me is a lot of early electronic music in Russia in the 30s was made by drawing out scores. And so Pixel Synth, which I showed, is very much inspired by this synthesizer called the ANS synthesizer that was made in the 1930s in Russia, where you draw out the sounds that you want to see. And so I am really interested in kind of really understanding how things work, like how computers work. And I feel like that is a big also part of my creative process, is understanding how these things work. And kind of the lower level I get, the more possibilities are opened up with that.
What do you think? What are the strengths of working with written code to make visuals? And when performing, how much control over the things everyone sees do you have? And don't you sometimes miss some physical controls? I mean,
actually, I tend to use physical controls and code at the same time, and so I have a MIDI controller, but what I can do is I can live code what the knobs of the MIDI controller correspond to. And so each knob is sort of a variable, and I can use that in the code. And I do find what I really like about code is that you can kind of have really high level control of what's happening. And sometimes when I'm performing using Hydra, I'll have a lot of code all set up ahead of time, and then I can sort of switch between it. But if I change my mind in the middle, I could do something sort of completely different, which is sometimes almost too much freedom, because with the code, you could get rid of everything and if you want to. But yeah, I find some things I really like to do with gestures, either using a MIDI controller or I like to use the webcam a lot, but not as an image, but more almost as a controller. So the amount of light hitting the webcam controls how much movement you see on the screen. Yeah, so I like having these two things together, the code and the physical interfaces.
Yes, we have a nice question. Can you tell us where the name Hydra came from?
I'm not sure. I needed a name. I gave a workshop with this idea I had about streaming, and then people were really excited about it, and we're like, oh, where can I use this? And so I had to put it online, and I just somehow ended up with the name Hydra. But I think I find meaning to it, and part of it is kind of the Hydra is this mythical creature that, like, when you cut off its head, it grows two heads. Where I think it's in Greek mythology, or that's one meaning of a Hydra. And it's sort of this ever-growing thing with no beginning point and no end point, and that is one inspiration for it.
Okay. So you said that you are very much inspired by uncertainty and chaos, like these concepts. And how do you feel they can be approached with Hydra? And yeah, how much uncertain outcomes do you get from this generative programming of visuals?
I think especially using feedback and using kind of messy or noisy input sources, such as a webcam or an audio signal, lets me have this sort of balance between knowing what's going to happen and not quite knowing what's going to happen. And so that's something that's really interesting to me, is that I've written all the code in Hydra, so I know what all the code does. But when I set up these kinds of feedback situations, there's so many things coming in and out that I don't always know exactly what's going to happen. And that creatively is an exciting place for me, because if sometimes with making art with code, you have to kind of decide everything ahead of time and say, I'm going to make this function that does this, I'm going to make this function do that. But to me, one of the kind of exciting creative things that happen is when something unexpected happens. And I view the computer as sort of a collaborator in this way of, like, I propose something slightly different happens, then I react to that and do something slightly different. And that also relates back to live coding, is that when you have the system that you can live in real time change and react to, then you can create this sort of organic creative process.
Okay, sounds nice and interesting. Yeah, as now culture has migrated mostly online, how do you feel? Has this anyhow changed how you approach your work? Or yeah, because like it seems like super cool and interesting that for instance Hydra and other live coding software, it's actually meant for connecting people online. And yeah, how do you feel? Have anything changed lately for you?
Yeah, it definitely has changed. I've been much less motivated to do live performances, which might seem counterintuitive since Hydra can run online and everything. But I think for me, a lot of aspects that I enjoy of it is sort of the presence in physical space and kind of creating an experience with other people who were there. And I've had trouble finding that online. But on the other hand, it's been really exciting to me to have community online events. And I feel like it's been easier for the community that's very geographically distributed to come together because everything's happening online anyways. And I have started to be more excited in some creating these alternative online spaces, like using the mouse cursor, or just trying to still create the idea of a sort of shared experience and presence with people online that can be in ways maybe different than a comment thread or something.
Yeah, about this, for instance, this mouse cursor connecting thing. What was the feedback that you got from people? Were they excited to see that they are actually participating in this, in what they are perceiving?
I got someone asked, oh, I hope my cursor didn't bother you. Or someone said, oh, I was drawing on your face, because I also had my face in it. But I think I would like to refine it a bit more, because everyone saw a kind of different thing. And so it was harder to, I think it was hard to understand what was going on. It might have just been too much. but people had fun, I think. And some people were like doing a dance with their cursor.
Yeah. Okay. From your previous examples, you showed us a visual example where the sounds were triggered from those squares, and I wanted to ask, did Hydra make the audio, or it was like sending it as a signal to other software?
I think in that example, I was just using web audio to trigger samples, but I've actually experimented with a lot of different things. Some directly in the browser, like making an additive synthesizer where different positions correspond to different frequencies of oscillators, but then also sending OSC to other programs. But I think that one was just using web audio.
Okay. Here's a question from viewers. Is Hydra compatible with other motion sensing devices, for example, Kinect or other?
Hydra isn't a motion sensing device, and that example was just using changes in pixel color to affect what's happening. You can use, if you have a way of routing the Kinect image to the webcam, then you could use it as a feed via the webcam, or you could use a screen capture to use its input into Hydra.
Yeah, okay. What are the current limits in your experience of Hydra? Like, where's the limit?
I think the browser has some limitations, but less and less as browsers keep getting more and more advanced. Yeah, it's actually very specific. It's actually mostly somewhat limited in that you can only kind of make these textures or combine visual textures with other things. But it's hard to, for example, make 3D objects or something like that.
So it's mostly for 2D kind of graphics.
Yeah, it is, because it's a JavaScript library and it's compatible with other things. There's a few different ways of either using Hydra as a texture for 3D objects, or using a texture with 3D objects as an input to Hydra. And that's something that was interesting to me, is making it this module and library that can be used with other things. So in that sense, it's unlimited. And the language itself is actually just JavaScript. And so anything that you could do in JavaScript, you could do in the Hydra editor if you wanted to. You might have to write lots of code to do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, as you were showing us, yeah, how Hydra works. So there are like functions that have, yeah, names. How sophisticated is each module, and how much time did it take for you to make them?
Each kind of function name actually just corresponds to a small piece of shader code, and the shader code is what runs directly on the graphics card. And then based on the order that you type things, it configures the shader code in different ways. And actually, I wrote most of Hydra. It took about a month and a half or so to write the whole thing, but this always happens with projects where like the first 90% goes really fast and then the last 10% takes forever. And so there's still things that it still feels unfinished to me 3 years later, but it happens.
Yeah, here's I think this should be maybe our last question. What do you wish you could do in a browser that is not possible at the moment?
Oh. I'm drawing a blank right now, but I know there's lots of things, but I can't think of. I'm drawing a blank. I'll have to come back to that question.
Okay, yeah, this is like a tough one, probably. But yeah, so Olivia, it's been a pleasure, and it was really nice talking to you about Hydra, and I'm already very excited and looking forward to a 2-day workshop starting tomorrow, so Thursday and Friday from 4 to 7 p.m. We're having a workshop, and yes, so thank you very much. I don't know, maybe any last words you would like to say to our viewers?
No last words. Thank you for having
No last
me.
words.
I'm looking forward to tomorrow and Friday. And also, if you have any questions that came up from this talk, I have some things planned for the workshop, but also if there's specific aspects that you're especially interested in, I will, at the beginning, we will talk about that. So feel free to bring ideas of things that are interesting to you as well.
Yeah, sounds cool. Maybe any things that we should check out before tomorrow, like anything?
Not that I can think of right now.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, and it was a real pleasure having you here. And thank you everyone for watching. Yes, have a nice evening, everyone.